Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All right.
Hey, Danny.
Okay. I guess we can start the recording part of it. Anything you want to say before that, Amanda?
I don't think so.
All right. Everyone's staying somewhat cool and good. So, last that I saw in the notes, we just left off at page 70. And I don't know
We were
if you,
talking about the taping metaphor,
yes.
and then that went into our conversation about physical computation on Saturday.
Okay. Let's see. Now I'm ready. Yeah, so we kind of, this is last week's meeting. We're kind of going through chapter 3, which was chapter 3 about? It was about, a lot of analogy talk, analogy machines, tapes, Pavlov, cybernetics, tapes, and we did, you know, we left off kind of with this. We had a big discussion about physical computing, looking into the previous Saturday meetings, and I guess we left off with this for next week. I guess this is chapter 4 commentary, which do you think I should just like copy this for the next? We're not quite in chapter 4 yet. We're at the very end of chapter 3, page 7.
Right. That I think I wrote while I was reading chapter 4, so we can just copy it into this week's meeting.
Okay. Oops. Okay. So I guess we'll just any I don't know if you want to give me any updates before we dive into stuff. I know I spoke to some folks yesterday. My only update is that it's much warmer, and that's okay. Be a busy July. I'm curious about. We have a lot of threads going on in this discussion. Also, Amanda, I want to make sure I'm using this page right. This sort of the books page with meeting pages. I realized I put a bunch of notes like last week just in here, but I don't know how you. I've deferred to you and how you want that to be used.
I just wanted to keep that page like notes and commentary that's related to the book, and then sometimes some like tangential stuff ended up in there, like screenshots of tweets and stuff. So I just want that to be like kind of like the annotated bibliography entry for the book. Like if we want stuff about the book in particular, we can go there and then go to the discussion pages for the more tangential things.
Okay. So I guess we'll dive back into chapter 3 for a little bit before we get into chapter 4, which is about language. Let's see here. So, changing and taping. I don't know if we want to kind of recapture what that analogy was about, or what does this mean by changing and taping again?
My interpretation of that was like a changing in the rules that govern the computation or the brain activity. So And I think I got that impression because he says maybe like a change in synaptic thresholds would be the how this would work in the brain. Um, so it's kind of like a change in programming,
Mm.
not just a change in state on the basis of like moving through some computation, but it's a change in like how the change in like the rules of the computation or something next level.
Mm.
I don't know exactly how that relates to the to whom it may concern. Not quite grasp that.
Well, yeah, I think that's sort of the. Is that related to this next bit about the concept of undirected messages spreading out until it finds its receiver?
Yeah, that
Mm.
kind of seemed like an abrupt transition to me.
Yeah. We have the siren, we have this legitimate concern message. Uh, this is very different, of course, saying that learning in the animal actually occurs by such a conjunction from spreading and of channeled messages. Um, he thinks it's possible it does, but evidence isn't have it yet. I'm curious. I don't. I guess I don't understand what he's saying enough to say, okay, yes, this happened or didn't happen to be proven by now. Um, Here's just the blood as the medium stuff. And we were about. You were going to say a lot more about that last time. I forget if we did. But this is sort of the um, sending things through the medium of the blood versus the nerve itself.
Yeah, I think that idea generally relates to our discussion of like analog computation and I guess embodiment more generally. So even if you think that on some level the brain is a computer, then still these like physiological, seemingly non-computational factors like the concentration of particular chemicals in the blood, like carbon dioxide or something, um, that would be something that could change like the taping, the synaptic thresholds, the rules of computation. So even if you think that the neural firing patterns are like should be analyzed like as computation, these other factors can still affect it, even if they're not the encodings of symbols or something. They like make the backdrop. They affect the physical realization of the brain as a computer.
Mm-hmm. I think we're kind of at the end of this chapter here. It's already a considerable narrowing of what my point of view requires to suppose that the fixing of influences of hunger or pain or whatever stimulus may determine a conditioned reflex passes through the blood. It would still be a great restriction if I should try to specify the nature of this unknown blood-borne influence, if any such exists. Um, this is not the same as saying that the influence on the threshold which determines learning is the product of specific hormones. again, is attempting to find a common denominator of hunger and the pain caused by electrified fence in something that we may call an emotion, but it's certainly going too far to attach emotion to all conditions of reflex without any further discussion of their particular nature. So I guess I'm kind of getting a little bit of almost like vague proto allusions to Fuchsian kind of stuff. Like it's almost as if he's touching upon basal affectivity here and sort of the emotions, but not. I'm not quite sure. Like Norbert and Fuchs would agree, or that maybe he's like kind of doing different things. But I kind of we talked last time. I don't think we really had a moving discussion. Um, but kind of how does Norbert feel about, I guess, embodiment and what that concept is or has become? And he's kind of I kind of get from this that he's trying to talk about, again, essentially the mediums and the messages and how these, at one level, I think he talks about it in the next upcoming chapters, like, oh, you could, he talks a lot about uh, communication of language in relation to machines and how, in one sense, a human is a specific kind of an input machine to communications. And I'm really kind of, just to kind of mention this again, I think it'd be interesting to relate this to the interpretant and associated discussion we had last time, yesterday with Johann Johns talked about something is being interpreted to somebody and received by an interpretant, stuff like that. But yeah, I think we're at the end of the chapter. So he concluded by saying, nevertheless, it's interesting to know what sort of phenomenon which is recorded subjectively as an emotion may not be merely a useless epiphenomenon of nervous action, and may control some essential stage in learning and other similar processes. I definitely do not say that it does, but I do say that those psychologists who draw sharp and uncrossable distinctions between man's emotions and those of other living organisms and the responses of the modern type of automatic mechanisms should be just as careful in their denials as I should be in my assertions. Interesting. What do we make of this? It's as he's kind of saying it almost feels a bit like Norbert's being highbrow pithy response to like rationalist bro stuff, where it's like people are saying, oh, there's a hard to buy that humans are unique in their emotions, and even at that end, emotions are potentially silly things. He's almost poking at that a bit, while challenging himself to be what he can say about his current understanding. But we arrive at chapter 4. So, chapter 4 is the mechanism of and history of language. Any initial?
I guess a quick note is the history. Oh, I wrote it down exactly this. The history of language stuff. What was the point? Not to say that it seemed like pointless to me, but I felt like I was missing what he was getting at, just as a general note. And I didn't try very hard since the last meeting to try to figure out what details that was, what purpose was that serving, the whole just the historical part. There's like I guess, okay, I highlighted a few parts that I guess kind of show why that was important. So the epiphenomenon of human intercourse is subject to all the social forces due to changes in the pattern of that intercourse. So I guess it was just like an anti-Chomskyan kind of point. Like he was trying to get at the, I guess, contingency of language. And I liked that quote that I wrote down that nothing is, there's no innate language, there's no innate grammar, but what is innate is the preoccupation with codes and with decoding and with symbols.
What was the quote that you wrote down? Where was it, in like this page or?
Yeah, under previous chapter 4 commentary, anti-Chomsky,
Oh,
nothing is innate. Yeah, so I guess I'm just reiterating what I took to be the main points of the chapter. So,
okay.
Yeah, what there is something innate, but it's not language itself. It's like the next level up.
Mm-hmm. Was this at the end of the chapter? Okay. Is chapter 4 very large? That's 6. Okay, there it is. All right. So chapter 5 begins at 95. So, okay, let's keep all that in mind as we wade through this chapter, I suppose. It was interesting because I didn't really know. I didn't really get a super strong connection either to, like, I don't really know to say what the point is either. But I feel like it was sort of this big, here's it's about language, and I understand him gearing up this sort of, you know, how humans operate stuff, but we dive into a lot of encoding and decoding, a lot of, where's the page? Signaling emotions. We have comments on. It kind of starts off by getting into this difference that even with, I don't want to say the lower animals, but animals who don't have a lot of means of variation or communication, they can still transmit these messages depending on, they can't articulate their forces like we do. And he's kind of giving all these examples of within the vertebrate limitations, birds can emanate human speech. There's sort of characteristics in common. And this thing about Russell and logical types comes up. I forget this is the first time here or just again, because I know we've discussed that before in our meetings of the logical types.
Yeah, another name drop where I felt like God, just one more sentence of explanation would have been nice.
Okay. To accomplish this, and by this he means, I feel like I can't remember if we actually discussed this previously or not, but he's talking about automatic machines and switch generators and yeah, the load generator stuff, and well, we have the conversation about what would make someone's like telephone calls don't have to be equally responsive to everybody. You kind of it
you can incentivize or like optimize because you're going to talk to person A a lot more than person B or whatever. That was last week or 2 weeks ago. Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's a lot.
Go ahead.
No, I didn't have much.
I think the idea is that in human to human communication, there are all these like efficiencies, and because of the context, we can get away with communicating a certain way. But in order to make human machine communication that efficient, two things are necessary. I think that's what he's referring to. Is like in order to make human machine communication as efficient as human human communication. So in order to do that, you need to automate aspects of the machinery.
The language directed towards the machine actually consists of more than a single step. From the point of view of the line engineer alone, code transmission along the line is complete in itself. And then he goes into, we must apply the notion of cybernetics theory methods. We evaluate the information it carries by determining the probability, the ensemble of all possible messages, and then taking the negative logarithm of this probability in accordance with the theory in chapter 1. However, this represents not the information actually carried by the line, but the maximum amount it might carry if it were to lead into proper terminal equipment. The amount of information carried with the actual terminal equipment depends on the ability of the latter to transmit or to employ the information received. And so this kind of, I feel like I'm still sorting out all the stuff on page 78, but he then goes into, we're thus led to a new conception of the way in which the generating station receives the orders. Its actual performance of opening and closing switches, pulling generators into phase, controlling the flow of water and sluices and turbines, etc., may be regarded as a language itself with its own system of probabilities of behaviors given by its own history. Within this frame, every possible sequence of orders has its own probability and hence carries its own amount of information. It's of course possible the relationship between the line and the terminal is so perfect that the information carried in the message from one point of view to the line will be identical in the amount of information transmitted over the compound system. In general, however, there will be a stage of translation between the line and the machine. And in this stage, the information may be lost, which can never be obtained. Indeed, the process of transmitting information may involve several consecutive stages of transmission flowing from in addition to the final effective stage. And between any two of these, there will be an act of translation capable of dissipating information. That information may be dissipated, but not gained is, as we've seen, cybernetic form of the second law of thermodynamics. So he kind of goes through this quite, I guess, I don't want to say meticulous, but maybe mundane example of looking at this process of how information going through these sort of machine mediums or other mediums or being translated is subject to the second law of thermodynamics in its cybernetics form, so to say.
Yeah, that's definitely related to the interpretant idea. Like every representation is a representation for something. Also, I liked that line on 78 that its actual performance of opening and closing switches, of pulling the generators into phase, of blah, 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 may be regarded as a language in itself. I thought that was that was interesting. Like what counts as language in this case is just the behavior.
So, and that's like, I have a lot of questions here, and I don't really, I feel like there's a lot of different ways I can form them. Um, uh, uh, I have a lot of questions about. We're talking about computation lately. We're talking about representations and interpretations, and the way things are. You know, we're kind of. I keep hearing the. In one of Bradley's talks about physical computing, about computation as like the means by which things transform states, and we're talking about this cybernetical stuff, and we're talking about language, and I feel like I'm thinking, as defined, there's certain relationships, but sort of like for me, just like how I'm starting my mind is, what is the relation to computation, to cybernetics, information changes, to language, as described in page 78, and to there was something else. I don't know. I guess I'll say Johann's talk, but sort of like I have. I guess, and I don't really want to steer it this way too much. But my background, I don't know what's resonating most in my sort of subconscious thoughts are. Is this chunk of stuff, which is quite specified, and I don't want to. I'm not trying to be anti-nuance about this, but I feel like there's something about all this stuff that like I kind of want to, and I wonder, I don't recall where it goes next with this, so maybe get into this next, but it's sort of like what is, like, there's just a bunch of questions about this, like what is a physical component of all of this? How does language relate to computation or transformation of states, even things like that? And like obviously, Norbert's explicitly said it's about sort of the capacity of some things. It's about the probability. Going back to the watery sluice quote, it's about the probabilities of behaviors and what it can do, and like there's a certain inherent information in that. In the way he's talking about information, and we had this whole big conversation last time, or I guess always, about custodian information and how that perhaps is a different approach to the framing of what's the unit of analysis here. Like Norbert's kind of saying there's the potential that something could be transmitted in a specific context, and so on and so forth. So I'm kind of just dumping a lot here in an inarticulate way.
But I think the question about well, I guess, what do you mean by the physical component? Do you mean like the phonetic that he describes at the beginning of 79, like the non-symbolic, non-semantic aspect?
Yes, and also like I guess I'm kind of still thinking about broader physical computing stuff in general, and like to what degree is it's like I'm thinking, and I don't really want to go too deep in that way because I think I already get lost in the murky waters. But just like what I'm still wrapping my head around the interplay between the physical component of medium versus message, of communication, of information being passed through, of an interpretant receiving something designed to be interpreted by them by someone else. All these things are kind of just like, where is the I don't know. I'll leave it at that for the time being. I feel like I'm just getting too murky in that space. I just have a bunch of questions there. But Norbert's kind of saying, up to this point, we've been discussing communications and terminating in machines, and this is where what I said. In a certain sense, all communication systems terminate in machines, but the ordinary language systems terminate in a special sort of machine and as human beings. It's kind of a little bit of what we were just building up. The human being as a terminal machine has a communication network which would be considered at three distinct levels. He gets in these levels basically a very physical, external level of ear and ear as it's attached to cerebral brain stuff.
Right, that's like the causal chain associated with just like sound and turning sound into sensation.
Mhm.
Um, and then the semantic level is not like contained in that. I guess this gets back to was it Stevens we were talking about when we were talking about how, like consciousness is perceptual and not inherently meaningful.
Mhm.
Maybe you could say something similar here, like the phonetic level isn't inherently meaningful. And then this semantic level is where meaning comes in. And then what was the third level? The behavior level.
Yeah, semantic is yeah. That's sort of the meaningless part you mentioned here. Interesting example about who and how things work can be interpreted and describing too. It's possible but difficult to determine the character of the mechanism, etc. Let's see, where does the third level begin?
81, there's a third level of communication which represents a translation partly from the semantic level and partly from the earlier phonetic level. So I don't know how these levels are supposed to relate to each other exactly. This is the translation of the experiences of the individual into actions.
It's sort of like is this? It's not quite the same as Mars levels analysis, which is a little bit different. And it's interesting that this is behavior related to implementation here. In lower levels, with only the level of language it can be observed beyond the phonetic input. Direct versus actions versus and coded and symbolic system of actions in language. Okay.
So it's as though each of the two levels, the phonetic and the semantic, have their own behavioral level. I feel like level isn't the right word here.
He's again referencing the second law of thermodynamics.
So basically introduces a very specific model for, I don't know, you could call it transformation, which is where you have like a maximum amount of information. And then that gets degraded as you transform it, where it moves through some part of the system. So it's kind of like a trophic level, or maybe like the second law of thermodynamics. So you have a maximum level of information, it degrades, and then you end up with this sort of entropy. I don't call it entropy, but whatever. And then you have the information that passes through. It's less than the maximum, but it's still, what gets passed on. So if you think about that, there's several steps. You end up with sort of this, you get information that's degraded, but it's doing some sort of work. So it's I guess the entropy there would be the thing that it's creating, like the symbols or the, maybe memory storage or whatever.
Yeah. He then talks about chimpanzees. Speech is such a peculiar human activity that's not even approached by many closest relatives and most active imitators. Yeah.
I think he's playing a little fast and loose with animal behavior here, but okay.
Yeah. I'm kind of trying to get what's he trying to say by referencing this. I guess he's kind of getting into. He basically mentions critical period about learning and speech here, and engaging in that. Why is it? Oh, okay. I remember hearing this part at some point. Humans basically why can't chimps talk like humans? There's a very funny line somewhere around here, I think. But that's okay.
Yeah, this is where he talks about our preoccupation with codes. So it's not that language is innate, it's that unlike chimpanzees, humans have this drive to symbolize, maybe is another word for what he's talking about, to encode and decode. Yeah, not the gift of speech, but the gift of the power of speech. And in a sense, speech is it's secondary to that act of coding and encoding. or encoding and decoding rather.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting lens of sort of just like bestowing or imbuing or use very great levity, like, oh, I'm going to bless this with a meaning. I've adorned a meaning on this thing, and now that I'm changing it or I'm remixing it, and all the meme stuff. The gift of speech does not go back to universal Adamite language as disrupted in the Tower Battle. It is strictly a psychological impulse, and not the gift of speech, but the gift of the power of speech. Survey. Chimpanzee has now built a mechanism, etc. In this book, we've already emphasized the man's extraordinary ability to learn as a distinguishing characteristic of the species, which makes socializing phenomena of entirely different nature from the apparently analog social life of birds and the bees and other social things. Evidence concerning children who have deprived of context for periods is perhaps not completely unambiguous. Wolfchild stories, where learning a language becomes limited and shows highly imperfect. And it turns to saying this is sort of true of most other abilities when we consider natural skills. Walking talks about a lot of like embodied and interacting with the world, sort of things. To sum up, the human interest in language seems to be innate, an innate interest in coding and decoding, and it's about as nearly as specific human interest as it can be. I was brought up as the son of a philologist. I don't know this. If questions concerning the nature and technique of language have interested me from childhood.
Yeah, this is where he gets into the history. Yeah, I'm still not sure what the point of it was, but he kind of, as he introduces it, it kind of seems like he's saying, "Oh, I'm interested in this. Here are my musings." So maybe there's not much to read into.
Yeah, it looks like he kind of goes into amateur's reflection on the history of language, and basically stuff his dad exposed him to. He goes into all of his historical context. Maybe it's slightly interesting for me to consider along my. Maybe this should be a branch of my. Because I'm doing sort of the paper about. I'm going to consider for that a little bit. But yeah, I don't know if we want to really say anything about this stuff. Holy texts, and more than that, Darwinian evolution, cool. Computer. Hebrew language, this evolutional language antedates the refined Darwinian evolutionism in biology. Computer's slowing down a lot right now. A lot of linguistic commentary, and just pretty much the rest of the chapter. It gets in the Renaissance. Yeah. Okay.
I think another significant takeaway from this bit is on 93. He says the attrition of language may be due to several causes. Language may strive simply against nature's tendency to confuse it or against willful human attempts to subvert its meaning. Normal communicative discourse, whose major opponent is the entropic tendency of nature itself, is not confronted by an active enemy, conscious of its own purposes.
It's a,
Getting back to this like second law of thermodynamics, but in information terms, I thought that was interesting.
it's maybe not quite a full devil of earlier in the book where you have the what kinds of devils were there, like Mephistopheles
right.
devils and the ones.
The one that was like intentionally evil and the one that was just like passively disruptive.
Yeah, the nature being is like a not contriving itself with new strategies to confuse you once you solve it.
And then at the end of the page, he talks about the challenges posed by trying to apply cybernetics to human language, starting with the last paragraph.
Yes. So desire to apply cybernetics of semantics as a discipline to control the loss of meaning from language has already resulted in some problems. It seems necessary to make some distinction between information taken brutally and bluntly and the sort of information which we as human beings act on effectively, or mutandis, on which the machine can act effectively. In my opinion, the central distinction here arises from the fact that it's not the quantity of information sent that's important for action, but rather the quantity of information which can penetrate into a communication and storage apparatus sufficiently to serve as a trigger for action. So is this basically saying something that goes through all these levels and all these other processes, but has some kind of an output at a behavioral or action-based level? Okay.
Maybe another way of saying the interpretant is a crucial piece of the puzzle. You can't just look at the information or the representation or the meaning, whatever you want to say. You have to look at the context, maybe the details of the receiver of that message.
Yeah, I think that's. I guess I should have put up in here. What was that weird spewing that I did? I want to make this a bit too cool, but it's okay. I think, yeah, and it's. I have a lot of things I want to say, but they're all like I don't really feel they're not crisp, and I can't articulate them, so it's a little frustrating for me. I'm kind of just flying through this. I've said that any transmission information or tampering with messages decreases the amount of information they contain, unless the information is fed in either from new sensations or from memories which have been previously excluded from the information system. Interesting. The statement, which we have seen, is another version of the thermodynamic second law. Now let us consider information system on used to control the sort of electric power substation, which we'll go in the chapter. Not just what, as Bradley kind of alluded to, not just what we put online, but what's left when it goes through all these final machineries, filter. When I hear a passage of music, the greater part of the sound gets to my sense and further reaches my brain. However, if I lack the perception and training necessary for the aesthetic understanding of the musical structure, the information will need a block. Yeah. I actually really like this part, but I don't know what to do with it. Information would a block where if I were trained musician, I'd be able to interpret structure, organization, etc. Semantically significant information in the machine as well as in man is information which gets through to an activating mechanism in the system that receives it as say and interpreted. And there's some relationship also, like this is a side comment. Going up to this, like I want to know like all these terms for me go to like and affordances. Like there's something between what Norbert's saying here, affordances, and like the means by which something in the machine or in the person can be an affordance, or like is an actively available interpretant. Like this is maybe the best example of it, but the way I'm particularly interested in this concept of how a communication and its communication can essentially be the same information, but if someone has different, I'm using affordances, but someone of different there has to be different activating mechanism. And it's quite interesting thing about mechanism specifically, which is what we talked about yesterday for that other paper. But activating mechanism that receives it, like unless something to receive it that results in a, I don't know if I want to say functional change, but there's something that becomes activated by it that is sort of not, the information is almost the same as it not existing in that context. But this is where I would point out, and I wonder if he, we're at the end of the chapter. The thing is, and this is one of the most interesting things to me in the whole arena. The thing is, or like a really fascinating topic for me is, let's say someone hears a bit of information, and when they hear it, they do not possess an activating mechanism to do it. But, this is why I kind of mentioned, unless the information is fed in either from new sensation or from memories, which have been previously excluded from the information system. Like that's I guess for me it's like, what is this nature of this thing where you can receive information, but you have no mechanism to activate it, but then later on you can remember stuff. And I just feel like that's whatever this is getting at is like related to major shifts in my personal life. Like there's been stuff I was exposed to earlier, didn't understand, and sort of a nice comfortable way of talking about it is like, oh, now that I know more about music theory or know more about the culture or the context by which the song was in, I really like it. Oh, the meaning has changed. I realized the song, oh, I thought it was just this upbeat, happy song, but it's actually a sad. It's upbeat, but it's actually talking about a really sad event in history because it's related to this tragic moment that they wrote a song about. Stuff like that. But also just there's I think within this context, and I don't know how if he gets into this in the next chapter or not, but like there's something here that has to do with when the interpretant or the interpreting the information when the activating mechanism receives it changes, or there's new means of the capacity, even a stored older memory, even something that doesn't exist currently, but something that's like read over or read again or passed over again through memory, through recollection or whatever it is, there's a particular something about that. So I don't know. I could say a lot more about that. I suppose we're pretty much out of time for this week. I feel like I was just talking nonstop, and I didn't make a lot of clear points, and then the hour left. That's what it felt like to me. So it was a slightly unrewarding session, but any
No, I
other?
didn't have a lot of comments about this chapter. Parts of it were just like confusing and not really in a thought-provoking way. It was just kind of like, what's the point?
And I think some of that's like an advantage to the fact that we collectively here like talk about this all the time. And I imagine it almost feels like old hat, or like yes, and like we'll get your reference to thermodynamic laws like for the fourth time. But yeah, I feel that. I want to articulate my point better about this. I don't even know what to type here yet, but I'll do that kind of as we close up. But it looks like for next week, I don't know, Amanda, do you want to get into next week, or what are you envisioning for next week?
Well, it'll be week after next. Let me check my calendar real quick.
Yeah, you're gonna be away then.
I'll be here for the next meeting, but then we'll have to skip a few weeks. So yeah, week after next. Yeah, let's just do next chapter. It's maybe a little shorter than chapter 4. I think a good length for one meeting.
Okay. I know we're kind of past the halfway point of the book now, so that's something. I feel good about that. Big time progress we're making. Okay, so for next week we'll be starting in chapter 5 and going through chapter 5, and sounds good. And then Amanda will be on break for a bit, so maybe we'll miss like 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something, to come back and go on from there. That's all for me. Thanks for coming by this week, and see you next time.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye bye.
Take care.
Bye.
See you.